Do you want to have a natural intonation like a native speaker, but everything you know about intonation is just to raise your voice in a question and that's it? Or maybe your English contains some Vietnamese accent that you want to get rid of. Hi, I'm Hưng, author of the book 5 Steps to Speak a New Language and founder of GDs in English. In this video series, I'm going to share with you a simple rule. Yes, just one rule that dictates about 90% of English intonation. And you'll be surprised. I will also show you how people unintentionally add Vietnamese accent to the English and how you can get rid of it. Most people think intonation in English is just to make you sound sexy or fancy. And some people might say, well, I don't need fancy English. I'm okay with normal English. No, intonation really goes beyond that. It doesn't just make you sound good or sexy. It makes you sound correct. That means if you make a wrong intonation, people may not understand what you say. Why? Because in English, intonation is just like tones in Vietnamese or in Chinese. Vietnamese has 6 tones, Chinese has 5 tones, and English doesn't have tones, but it has different intonation patterns. And the ups and downs of a pattern are similar to tones in Vietnamese. But be careful, they're not the same. We'll talk more about it later. For now, you just need to know that if your intonation is wrong, it will be just like you make the wrong tones when you speak Vietnamese. Let me give you an example. In the north, people in Ba Vi, they might say, ở Ba Vi có con bò vàng, instead of ở Ba Vi có con bò vàng. It's really hard to understand, right? I'm sorry, I don't mean to make fun of people in Ba Vi, just to give you an example. Same thing happens in English. When you make the wrong intonation, it will change the melody of the sentence. And people will have a hard time understanding what you say. Some people even invent their own intonations. They make it up. Wow, that's really a disaster. That's even worse than having no intonation at all, because that way they're actually creating a completely wrong intonation. So in English, what creates intonation? There's one very important thing that creates most of English intonation. I'm not saying all, but most of English intonation. What is it? That stress. Stress, yes. Stress creates most of English intonation. Why? Because, let me give you an example, very simple. How are you doing, right? A very simple sentence. How are you doing? Now, what if I say, how are you doing? How are you doing? Let me give you a quick look. Let's say, okay. Right? How are you doing? Right? How are you doing? Now, what if I stress the words how and do? And I'm going to put a bit more stress on do, okay? And it will be like this. How are you doing? Right? How are you doing? How are you doing? See? Do you hear the intonation now? Do you hear the melody? Right? If I ignore the words and I say, I just keep the melody, it will be like this. La 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 la. Right? La 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 la. You see that? How are you doing? How are you doing? So if you have no intonation, it will be like, how are you doing? Right? So that's a very simple sentence. I'm not making up any intonation. I'm just stressing a few words and boom, I've got beautiful intonation. And more importantly, that's correct intonation. Because I'm not making it up, I'm following the stressing rules. So why does stress create intonation? This is what most people don't know, so listen closely. When it comes to stress, most people think, or most people just learn that stressing means you say it louder and longer. That's not wrong, but that's not the whole story. The most important thing about stress is not because it is pronounced louder and longer. The most important thing about stress is it is pronounced with higher voice tone or higher pitch. What's the keyword? Voice tone. That's the key. Let me give you an example. Let's say intonation is very important in many languages, right? So let me give you this example. Let's take a look at this. Okay, I hope you can see this, my handwriting here. Okay, intonation, right? Intonation is very important in many languages, right? So when you stress it correctly, every sound that you want to stress, you need to say it with higher voice tone, like higher pitch, like you raise your voice higher, like when you're singing, right? So it will be like this. Intonation is very important in many languages. So if I ignore the words, I just say the melody, it will be like this. La 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 la, la la la, la la la, la 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 la, right? So you see, it's very important, and intonation in English, it's not complicated like tones in Vietnamese. Vietnamese has 6 tones, quite a lot of ups and downs, and dấu hỏi, dấu sắc, dấu huyền. It's very complicated, but in English it's quite simple, just ups and downs a little bit, and you have the intonation, right? So it is the voice tone that makes the melody. It is the voice tone that makes the intonation. So you can see that stress creates voice tone, and voice tone creates melody, right? So that's why I said stress creates intonation. In English, stress is not the only thing that creates intonation. There are a number of other factors that take part in creating different intonation patterns. For example, a statement can have a different intonation pattern from a question, or a yes-no question can have a different pattern from a question with what, why, or when, or sometimes a word in a long sentence can have a different intonation from when it stands alone. But stress is the main factor that forms about 90% of all English intonation. So that's why it's so important. So that's why just by putting the right stress alone, you already have pretty good intonation, good or great. So how to stress properly?